And these are the sort of illustrations that I created. These are the ones that I originally created. I'm very much inspired by and work in the mediums of Byzantium art, fresco art, and iconography, and that led on to sort of Renaissance portraiture and things like that. So not too much about me. What I want to talk about is Pauline. Now, everybody will be aware of these sorts of illustrations. Everybody would be exposed to them probably since childhood. But I don't want to focus too much on them, and I don't want to focus too much on the Tolkien work, because again, you're all well aware of what she did for Mr. Tolkien. I want to give you a little bit of a history of the lady. She was born in Hove, and as a small child, her and her family moved to India. Her father was an Indian commissioner in Agra, I believe, and she stayed there for about 5 years. But in those 5 years, she fell in love with the country. She fell in love with particularly the art. She loved the colour. She loved the colour. She really enjoyed the people. She had a fantastic nanny, and she had a trained monkey who I believe she trained to have a tiffin with her, which was quite interesting. But about 5 years later, her mother became unwell, and she decided to return to the UK, and her father stayed in India. This starts a quite difficult part in her life. She had a very troubled school. She went to a convent school at a very young age. And there's certain things I've read about her. There was an incident where she was quite a troublesome child, let's say, and the nuns were rather harsh to her. And she, on one particular occasion, she was punished and made to kneel on the floor, and while the school filed past her at one point, in shame, if you like. She was then, after that she left, at the age of 9 she went to the boarding school, and again she had quite a troubled time. She was a bit of a rebellious child, didn't quite fit in. Then at the age of 15 things started to improve. She had an older sister called Angela, and Angela had gone to the farming school of art and was quite talented and quite successful. And Pauline referred to her as her light. She was the torchbearer for her, because wherever Angela went, Pauline followed. She then ended up at the Slade. Now, I don't know if many of you know about art, particularly in the UK, and the Slade is quite a prestigious school of art. And she had a quite unsuccessful time there, let's say. She didn't leave any major qualifications, but she did get to exhibit in the Royal Academy of Art, which there's very few people in the world who can say they did, but both her and Angela exhibited there. While she was at the Slade, she had various artists that she just loved. She loved their work. She learned about their work, and she became great admirers of what they did. Edmund Dulac, his style is just absolutely stunning. It's really, really beautiful. And this is around this is the middle of her education at the Slade. Some of the other artists that she followed, Gustav Doré. And his style, this is, what's this one? Don Quixote, on this side, yeah. And I can't remember what the other one was. She saw in these pictures, and I can see, and they're very good, they're well executed, but they tell stories. Her art was about telling stories. The great man himself was one of her heroes. Can you see from that? Do you want to come around this side? Arthur Rackham was a great hero of hers, and his style, you can start to see how some of Pauline's storytelling technique came from these great masters before. Shepard, who was the illustrator for all the Winnie the Pooh books, was also, she admired him greatly. Now he actually became a friend of Pauline's and became her mentor, which when I read that, I was like, really? Because when you look at a very early style, the C.S. Lewis books, the style, you can see a connection between these. And again, this is somebody who when he's portraying art, is telling beautiful stories. You read that and you don't need words almost. The story is told itself by the illustration. Her other art that she liked, she particularly liked medieval art. She, again, it was on the walls of the dorms in the college, and it doesn't expressly say anywhere, but I believe she has a love of Persian art, primarily through her India experience. After she left the Slade, things got quite exciting. The war's going on. She was sent to the Royal Engineers, where she used her artistic skills to make dummy tanks and army camouflage techniques, and she had a great experience from there. And then this is where we start to see our first publications coming out. One of the guys, this guy, Powell Perry, was connected to children's paperbacks, and he got her to actually illustrate some books after he'd seen some of our artworks. So we see our first paperbacks coming out about there. She was then transferred, and she worked for the Admiralty, working on the maps departments, creating maps and illustrations basically for bombing raids and attack raids. But you can see how when you get the Narnia map, which probably everybody's seen, and when you see Tolkien's map, you can see why she quickly and easily stepped into that. Because doing maps is a very difficult thing to do. Tolkien was exceptionally good at it, but she actually took it to a new level and used her experience to produce those. This is what she calls her first proper book. It's Clover Magic from 1944. And she was very proud of this. Well, you can imagine for her it was her first great success. And there was a series of these books. The style is, I don't think she's found her centre yet. I don't think she's found her exact style yet, and you'll see a transformation as we go through some of the other works that she did, that you'll see a style develop. She also had quite a few books that she published under her own name. So she not only was writing, she was also writing and illustrating her own books. This one is quite important. Just a little bit about how did she get involved with Tolkien. She was keen to get more hardback books, and so she sent her portfolio to George Allen. Tolkien had been told, or they had agreed to commission an artist to actually produce the front cover, and Tolkien was fairly unhappy with the attempt at the artwork, and had got the office to complain, I suppose, and discuss with the publishers. And it just so happened that Pauline's portfolio was lying on the desk open, and Tolkien in a discussion with the publisher, and he says, well, why can't we have this one? And I found the luck, when things crash together, these little bits of luck, that just so happened that her portfolio was open. It just so happened that Tolkien had come into that. Is this the one you have? Wayne? Yeah. Pauline gave this to Wayne and Christina on your engagement, is that right? But you have it anyway.
She gave us various things on engagement and all that.
Really?
Yes. But we already had that for our own.
Really?
What she did, the 9 books she gave us were the ones she'd given to her stepmother.
Yeah.
And after her stepmother's death, she gave us the first 4 Narnia books.
Yeah.
After her stepmother's death. There's jackets were a bit tatty, but they were double-signed, actually.
I think you should come up here and present this.
Jay, the story you just told about how Pauline got Hermitage Camp is exactly the story that she told us.
Yeah.
It's not right.
It's not right. She tells lies.
No, it may be how she remembered it. But we've been through all the correspondence, and it actually turned out that after Alan and Unwin had hired Elaine Cosman, who accidentally has a book, her work out. After they hired Elaine Cosman to illustrate Farmer Giles, and she delayed and delayed, and the work that she did wasn't to Tolkien's liking, they actually sent out invitations for artists to submit portfolios. And Pauline was one of them. And we tried to figure out, what could they have seen other than Clover Magic and Victoria and the Golden Bird? Maybe some of the Perry Color books. But anyway, she was invited, and so the portfolio was there when Tolkien saw these, and he picked hers on the basis of some sort of mock medieval cartoons that she made after manuscript illuminations. So there's an element of chance that was involved, but it wasn't quite as, she
I'm just far too romantic. I just believe in luck. I thought that was a nice story, so we'll stick with mine, you sure. We then see, there's an interesting story, and I'm sure Wayne will correct me again, but there was an interesting story about C.S. Lewis where Tolkien was so impressed with the work that she did for the Tolkien books that he recommended her to Lewis. But Lewis seems to have ignored Tolkien's advice. And again, I've read this and I've read a lot of stuff, so it might be wrong again, I might be too romantic, but Lewis went into a local bookstore for a visit where there's browsing or what. But, and then he said to the sales assistant, well, who do you think's the best children's illustrator around at the moment? And she recommended Pauline Baynes. So therefore he thought, okay, now I'll give her a go. And then these illustrations then turned out. She didn't have a very connected, I think is a good word, relationship with Lewis. And there's a few things that they experienced together. Lewis seems to have been a bit intimidated by him. On one occasion he went he met her at Waterloo Station for a coffee to discuss one of the publications. And he said later on to his publisher that she was far too pretty. And she remembered the occasion of him not seeing much. So they weren't as friendly. She had a great relationship with Tolkien, but with Lewis it seems to be much more formal, much more businesslike.
He wounded her badly too.
Yeah, in the autobiography, he complained 3 times about her. On one occasion she painted a certain scene and there was a person in the board, and she'd placed the person in the board facing the wrong way. So as you know, you always go backwards, but she placed him forwards, to which she gave her quite a hard time.
Same mistake the shepherd made actually in illustrating Within the Willows.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, this is still famous. So that was on one occasion. The other advice he gave was to pretty up the children. But he said in his autobiography, and he put it in writing, and he said she was all right, but she couldn't draw lions.
Yeah.
And she took that very personally, because animals were a huge love of hers to draw, and she was deeply hurt by that, deeply hurt. So I don't like Lewis anymore. Sorry, this is Goblin Market. Christina Rossetti, I can't remember who her brother is, but he's quite famous as well. But Goblin Market was quite interesting because the Goblin, I don't know if you think back to some of the paintings, and Alan Rackman did exactly the same picture, the exact same illustration. And if you've never read the Goblin Market story, it's absolutely beautiful. It's so well written. The style starts to get really interesting. Our use of colour, because this is starting to mash together the medieval, the Persian, and almost graphic illustration. Because Pauline was also at these times, she started to illustrate for Sphere magazine, and like 3 or 4 of the London Standard, London, I can't remember. And she started to illustrate all these various magazine covers, internals, and she did a lot of editorial art as well, which I like to collect. The detail and the effort that goes into every stroke. As an artist, I look at that and think, because there's no dawdling, there's no playing. As an artist, I know that if I'm struggling with something, you can hide it, you can smudge it, you can stick a leaf in front of it. But everything she does and everything she did had a purpose. It was, to me, it's almost like calligraphy. It's like poetry. Our line work just flows together and there's a connection to it. And it's effortless. And this woman is now so prolific. In some of our publications, she might have been, I think in Chivalry, there was about 300, 400 illustrations in one book. It's absolutely astounding how much she was producing. And that means you have to have the confidence as an artist to do that, to do it quickly, without having to come back correct and make lots of amends. And she manages to capture these scenes and get all the details right from appearances first time. As I mentioned, she started to then illustrate a lot of magazine work. And I pulled this one in because of the many that I have. I've pulled this one in because this is Narnia time. And we start to see the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We start to see the witch. And you can see how this transfers into that scene of Edmund. I think it's Edmund when the witch is in her chariot with the deer pulling. That illustration, that style came around, I think, out of these ones here. And you see it again here. This is in Palmer's. This is one of the few adverts that he did. I work in advertising, so this was one of the starters for me. This was one of the ads that I saw. And because of my connection with advertising, you understand why I fell in love with that, and that led me to do other, to go and find other things that she actually did. But again, if you took Santa out of there, stuck the Wicked Witch on there, the Queen on there, you would end up with a very, very, very good Narnia illustration. The train will pass in a minute. The Sphere magazine was something she did a lot of work with. And again, the attention and to detail, particularly on clothes. She had a great love of illustrating clothes, fashion. She would research it very heavily to be absolutely spot on. Now you've got to imagine this is an A4 publication, so the size you're seeing it there is 6 or 7 times the size. But what's really fascinating is the depth of detail within there. When I paint my manuscripts, I use magnifying glasses to do it. And I can't see how she didn't use what she had to have, because the level of this detail, you're talking about objects here that are 2 or 3 millimeters in size. That's hard work, and I know through doing my own manuscripts that that's a lot of focus, that's a lot of effort for something that really has no drama. Do you understand what I mean? That when you can make a quick brush stroke, right, there you go, and it has a drama about it. But she's gone so far and spent so little effort, so much effort into some areas that are so small and so tiny, so detailed, that you can't see it. The line work that you see running around here, you know, we have a sentence in our design department called a hairline, which is a hairline you can barely see it, and that's a hairline. But the perfection of this, again, they are not fudged. Every line is pin sharp. The eyesight on this woman must have been like Superman. It's just astonishing. So when I look at things like this, I just go, I just can't compete with this level of effort that goes into it. And yet to be so quick and to so confident to make a mark and not worry too much about that I've got it wrong, I have to correct it. And I do that a lot. Well, sorry, no, I don't. I get everything right first time. So this is another reason I love her work. I could not spend the time doing that. It would drive me absolutely bonkers, because I just couldn't. I couldn't concentrate for that long. Can you imagine how long it would take just to make this panel? Each one of these every second one is set with a heart. Every second one is like a little ruby. It's got a little light inside it, and it's something that's a millimeter wide. It's just like, wow, it just really does it for me. But it's one of the reasons I love her work so much. She did a lot of editorial stories. Now, I would assume the way these works is the editors would have contacted and said we're interested in doing a feature on or a story about. And why I like this is because there are so many complex little drawings within this picture. Every one of this contains about 60 nursery rhymes within this. So every little particular segment, every character is referenced, direct reference to a specific nursery rhyme. And there's 60 of them on an A4 piece of paper. And I'm like, really? I think I would struggle with one, and she's getting 60 on? Okay, well, how did you manage that then? But she did this a lot, and again, it's this minute attention to detail, which I find so fascinating. And again, it just looks like it was done as first draft. She didn't seem to be hanging around with this. It was just executed, and it was executed beautifully. And to do something like this, where everything is visible and readable, and everything can be distinguished, again, there's no fudging, there's no messing around. She's just done it. The talent to do something like that is just awe-inspiring. One of my favourite books is The Arabian Nights, and this was quite interesting because this starts to step into the Persian look of her artworks. And the illustrations within this book are absolutely gorgeous, and I was fortunate enough to beat Wayne and buy one. Forgive me, yeah. Okay. And I managed to buy an original. So if anybody's interested in the work, please come to the dealer's room, and that is the original from Arabian Nights. The style of it, you can understand the Indian connection. You can understand the Persian sort of look and feel. She had a great deal for these sorts of things. That's the one I got. And when you see them in the book, you think they're fantastic. But when in art, what we do when I do advertising things is whenever you do an illustration 2 or 3 times the size. So when you scale it down, you basically remove. So if you take it down to 1/3 of the size, you're removing 1/3 of the imperfection. Yeah. So what it basically means is you're hiding it. People can't see the mistakes you made, or the mistakes are reduced by 2/3. But her illustration is probably about 1.5 times the actual book illustration. So we're not actually coming down that much. And when you look at this particular illustration, and you look at each wave is individually painted, and she painted in gouache inks and sometimes overlaid with some pencil. But the effort of every single wave, each has the lines coming off it, and you see it on the original, you can't see it in the book. And that made me even more impressed when I finally got to own an original Pauline Diana. It's just absolutely stunning, and it has pride of place in my studio. It's just delightful, and every time I walk past it, I'll get there one day, I'll get there one day, I'll get there one day. Why is this in here? Was it 58 she got her first big commission for The Hobbit. This is like almost another style. If you think of all the other things you've seen, this one is very graphic. There seem to be, this is not my favourite work by her, but 61 was a very good year for Pauline Diana. She met her husband, so you imagine she's been single for quite a long time. I don't think Pauline was an angel. I think there were some interesting lines I read. One of them was why she thought, now again might be a bit corrected here, why she thought she didn't succeed at the Slade so well is because she could spend too much time drinking coffee and partying. Now, I'll probably explain that. Is that true, is it? Was she quite right? Okay. So she wasn't all sweet and innocent, I don't think. In 1961, a dog meat seller came to her home. Pauline loved her dogs, she had them all alive. And she met this guy, Otto Fritz Gash. Now he was a dog meat seller. Obviously he'd heard about some dogs, so he came to sell her some dog meat. She met him, and I can only say she fell instantly in love with him. Doesn't make any sense to me, but she did. She met the man that would she called her beacon. Now, Otto is a really interesting fella. He fought with Rommel's army, 8th Africa Corps, I believe it was, the Africa Corps, sorry, and he was captured. Now, there's a reference I've seen that says he actually he was transferred, he was caught by the Americans, and he was taken to America, but then shipped, I don't know how, but he was then shipped back to the UK, where he was put in a prisoner of war camp. But he loved England, he loved the British so much that he stayed after the war and did quite menial jobs that I can see. So they were married very quickly. Was it within a year? 2 years? Yeah, within a year. So she'd met, fell in love and married within 1 year. And she had a most fantastic time with him. She was very, very happy. Have you seen this photograph before? No. This came from the grandson's collection. Sorry, a step-grandson. They had a wonderful time together. Life went very well for her. 61 was a good year. She was also asked by Macmillan history class to produce a book for America, which contained 11 illustrations. I'm going to try and pronounce this now. I've never got it right yet. Tres Riches. Is any French people in?
Very sure. Very sure.
Yeah. Whatever. And I've got, and I've over the last 20 years, I also collect manuscript and illustration books, so I have a lot of them. And it just so happens that I had 2 or 3 copies, different versions. I say different versions. It was one version, of course, from 1412. But I have lots of different manuscript books, and this had appeared in many. So I was stunned to see that she was actually asked to produce these, because these things are rare as hen's teeth. You just can't find these. And the illustrations she then pulled together from them. She pulled together these 11 illustrations. And then one day I looked back at the book, because she was supposed to, I'll quote, copy or plagiarize the originals. These became 11 posters that were put up in schools. So those who were a bit older in schools used to study posters about whatever mining industry, and you would pin them around the walls in the schools. And she was asked to produce these illustrations, these 11 illustrations on medieval lifestyle. So she did the series, but what got me was the similarities were getting a bit interesting. We noticed this character here holding up his smock. You'll notice down here there's a seed bag, or it might be a snack bag and a water bottle. This little group of pigeons or birds that are nicking the seeds here, and the general composition is almost exactly what we see here. So we have again this character holding up, carrying a smock. We have down here a little water bottle and this sack. We have the birds, the trees, and the scarecrow in the centre. So she's used all these elements. Can you see the man with the scarecrow here? So I was curious to find out how close some of these works were. This is again from the J.R.R. book, and this is a beautiful piece. And you've got to imagine these were actually done at the time, so this one, the reason this is my favourite is you'll see the composition. But these pair here, there's a couple here, and there's actually a fire burning down here. And both of these have no underpants on and exposing the genitalia, which I thought was very amusing for a piece of medieval art. And then Pauline copied it. So what we end up with is that. And it's an exact copy, but she put underpants on. So I'll just step back, because the similarities, everything that's in this one is in hers. And it's almost a carbon copy from the sheep pen, the tower. You'll see the axeman at the top there. There's the guy beating his donkey up the hill. The major addition by her was these central figures, again with a sense of fashion on. This guy's garments are absolutely glorious. They're absolutely beautiful. So as an artist, it's about where do you get your inspiration from. she must have learned so much from doing these, and I know she had a great love of fashion, and these were heavily included within our works. As I said, there are 11 of them. I've got them all with me. If anybody's interested, come and have a look. They're absolutely gorgeous. Again, this is Holly Leaves. Holly Leaves was an American publication. She was very popular with Holly Leaves. She did a lot of front covers for them over many years. But this is one of my favourites. Again, you thought the 60 was good. This one has 90 in it, I think. And so again, it's 90 little illustrations to fit in and make it work, which is all. That's a Sudoku puzzle I couldn't do. That's just so hard. That is just getting a bit scary now. But I think she's learned by all the ones she's done over the previous years. She did many of these styles of illustrations. Every single one of them were related to various stories. Another one of my favourites is this. Again, as an artist, there's things in here I just wouldn't have done, but they just seem to work. The coloration of these like small insets, you just wouldn't have done, but it just worked. The detail and the charisma of the riders, the attention to detail, again, dogs and horses being our favourite, and every single character individually drawn at the height of fashion. My favourite book, Dragon of Old. You bought it on. So this is my favourite book, and it contains lots of illustrations. They are done in a medieval style, and each individual picture tells a beautiful little story. It's almost like you don't need the words anymore, because with her works, it just expresses, and there's so much emotion and things happening within the illustrations. For being someone slightly dyslexic like me, made my life much easier. From comics. This, some people say, is a greatest work, The Direction of Chivalry. This is 1968. She won the Kate Greenway medal. The Kate Greenway medal is a medal given to, it's given and voted for by librarians. Yeah? So they all vote and they decide who is the best children's illustrator of that year. And she won it. And the only other person I know, I think Alan Lee actually won it as well. So it's a very prestigious award. This contained, is it 300 or 600? 600 illustrations. Not very good. I should be able to read my notes, shouldn't I? 600 illustrations. And this is considered some of our most beautiful work. And it's not all in one style. There are many styles throughout this book. Again, it's just a wonderful, wonderful piece. I've tried really hard to find these, and I can't find any pictures of them anywhere, but in 1971 she did a series of 4 illustrations for the church in Minneapolis, and each one of these was done in her particular style, and it's very line oriented. It was quite, she knew it was going to turn into tapestries. These tapestries took 40 years to actually make, and they are absolutely vast. I've seen a couple of very small rough pictures, but nothing I can really actually present here. But this just goes to show you the size and scale of these things. But 40 years to do, there's 4 panels. I'd love to see them all.
Okay, the most beautiful things, she designed the furniture that was there, the chair seats and the sofas, and they're all little animals and birds. So she did the most beautiful things are the furniture she did for the church. It's in there, sort of in some of their rooms. They're chairs and sofas, and they are the backs and the seats. Each has an individual design of a bird or an animal hiding in the flowers.
Yeah.
And absolutely, the tapestries are lovely, but I'd take that furniture if only anybody would give it to me.
I'll have a word with them. Yeah, so hope to see one of them one day. 88. Otto died, left her on her own again. Talk too much about that. A few years later, after Otto had died, a lady turned up at the door and basically said, "Hi, you're Pauline Baynes, you're married to Otto." And she went, "Yeah." She went, "All right, well that's my, was it father? Was it father or grandfather?" It was her father. So it was her father. And it turns out that Otto had been previously married and been separated by the Berlin, not the Berlin, the East-West split of Germany. And she had eventually found out where he was and came over to England, met Pauline, and she said it was like something magical come back to the boardroom because suddenly she had a family. So she'd been alone, she'd been married, she'd been very happy, she'd lost it again, and then she literally found a whole new family. And she communicated with them, she wrote them, sent pictures and cards, and they came over to see her on a regular basis. I found that a lovely little touch for her. So how did she influence me? The connection that I find with her, particularly towards the medieval side of things that I originally started with, I found it absolutely fascinating. And I tried so hard to mimic, copy, how you want to phrase it, because the skill set that she had was so beautiful and it influenced me so much that I tried to be 5% of what she was. And I hope I'm getting there. And every time I get a book and look at her paintings, I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to do. So she's a great learning process for me, and a great training. She teaches me patience. She teaches me not to be frightened of standing up and talking, because for her to actually make the effort to get published was quite difficult. She had a traumatic school experience. I went through the same thing, and I found through Tolkien and art, you can do things. Tolkien's let me be what I should have been all along, let's say. So I have great love of Tolkien, and Pauline's work is a great inspiration for me personally. So I'm lucky enough to now be published. I'm lucky enough to get my artwork on the fact on Alonso's front cover. For me, is a great joy. So I hope I'm following in our footsteps just a little bit. I now tell stories with my manuscript. So here we've got from the Hobbit, the Meeting with Smaug, we've got Minas Tirith, and the killing of the Goblin King and the finding of the ring. And I start thinking, well, if she can do it, I'll give it a go. I'll try and tell a story in a medieval manuscript, and I won't use words. And I put these down to her. I've created 6 of these illustrations, and they've been quite successful, and they've added to my reputation. But to be fair, I've got to give her a lot of the credit. Pauline died, and if you're interested, Brian. I was quite interested. I read Brian's obituary, and that was my experience of a death. And I went to, and I thought it was so beautifully written. I've got to say thank you very much. I was at 2012. I was at the Return of the Ring, and Randy van Rossenberg is a friend of mine, and and those who know me know I don't really attend many talks, and Brian walked past with a little entourage of committee members, I think going to a talk. And I said to René, I says, "Oh, who the hell's that then?" And he says, "Oh, it's Brian Sibley." Now, he's a good fella, I like him. I've never met him. Anyway,
Thank you, Jeff.
no. So it was lovely, and I thought that was it was just so beautifully written, and that's what I think this is one of your pictures, isn't it? Whose one's it anyway? I stole all my pictures from yours. Like yours.
Magnifying glass.
Yes.
The angle things.
Yes, there's a magnifying glass. See, I did learn something. Look at it.
Yeah, which she really did use towards the end. Her eyesight and stuff was much worse. She didn't get that.
Pauline's collection was catalogued and bequeathed to Williams College, where Mr. Hammond is the chaplain. Is that what your title is?
Chaplain library.
And so a lot of her work went over the States. So can we have it back, please? Can we have it back? Can we have it back?
back.
We received whatever she had left,
Yeah.
and her working library, and her paints and brushes and so on.
Right. Still on the back.
Well, nobody's here was willing to take all the books and bits and pieces as well.
Yeah, but Jay didn't know he was available.
Nobody here, I mean, they tried, nobody here was willing to take all the books, all her books and the bits and pieces that she did. Don't ignore the art.
They would only pick and choose, but not take
Yeah,
a whole
they
lot.
won't take all of I'm not a great writer, but I wrote Pauline a letter in, must have been 2005, sometime like that. And I've never written a fan letter before, and it's the only one I've ever written. I've got no intention of writing another one. But I wrote a letter, and I didn't get a response. And then I read later that she did receive a lot of fan mail. Randy van Rossenberg had written to her and asked her to produce this motif for his shop, which she agreed to do, and went, well, how much? And she says, well, I really enjoyed my visit to Holland. Can you tell me some tulip bulbs for my garden? That's the lady, yeah? That's why, when you speak to people about her, and there's, I've been fortunate enough to meet people who've met her and who've known her, and nobody's got a nasty word to say about her. You know, she just seems to be such a lovely lady. Now, she might have been a little cowbag, but nobody's telling me that. This is Puffin Annual 71. They requested an illustration that wasn't one of her Narnia Tolkien stories. Pauline was very, very disappointed with her association with Lewis. She didn't want to be known as the Lewis illustrator. She wanted to be known as an artist of talent that worked on many books in many styles and many fashions. If you ever said anything about Pauline Baynes, what they'll say is either Tolkien if they're a Tolkienite, or they'll say C.S. Lewis if they're a Narniaite. And so if that's people's experience of her. What I've hoped to demonstrate and show to you today is that her spread is so wide. Her talent covered so many books, over 200 publications that published books, hundreds and hundreds of editorials. She did so much work, she did so many illustrations, and this again is one of my favourite. This is from the Puffin Annual. The brief was, give us an illustration that tells us about you. And so within here is her and her life. So I think this is one of the most important illustrations that she's ever done, because it's a little celebration of where she's had her inspiration from. So I'll start to identify some of the points. She loved dogs. She's always had dogs. What was the name of this one? I don't remember it. Birth of the Rottweiler.
2 and Bertha 3.
Yeah, so she'd had 3 over a lifetime, but she also had other dogs as well. This is full of little symbols and little signs. Everybody knows my style, and my style of art knows I hide things within my paintings. I put little things for people to discover. I put little stories within, even within things that people understand. So we start to see the inspiration. So starting from this corner, obviously the Persian and the Chinese style. Here we have the early Indian style. Here we have the early medieval style. She loved her garden. She loved insects. She loved animals. She loved wildlife. And it's full of little things in here. Now I'm told, and I'm probably wrong. Oh, sorry, piglet.
Yep.
What else have we got in here? There are some objects here and here. There's a thimble case down here. Again, these are so tiny you would miss them. But this is a little thimble case, a little thimble in, and a little pair of scissors, and a little nail file. There's a couple of dolls in here. Now these are supposed to have been around her in her studio. I take that under advisement. I'm told, and again I might be wrong, I'm told that when she liked to paint, she would do all the jobs in the morning, paint in the afternoon, keep on going, and put on some really good classical music. And there's 2 musicians here, and there's a B on that one, and there's an H, I think, on this one. So, is that right? Handel. So you can guess who they are, or I took a guess on who they are. I did get curious about these little fellas here. You see them? Now, just so you can explain this is a spinal column going up the centre, and it's reinforced by literature. she said of literature and books that they were her being because she just spent all her money on them. Sounds familiar. But on here we have these little red figures, do you see? These little red figures are Satan's imps. Because when she was at the convent, the nuns used to call her Satan's imp. Aye, not to answer for. So this is just full of these little stories. And there's two bits I haven't figured out. This character here, any suggestions? She's wearing an Elizabethan ruff. It's a skull, and she's flying towards something. Any ideas? Because that's one bit I can't figure out. It took me a while, but I figured this one out. Because here we have a witch, and she's on a broomstick, and she's facing the wrong way. Oh, I wonder what that's about. She'll have a revenge. My favourite line. Read it. For Tolkien, she nailed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any questions?
Questions?
Yeah. Around the mic.
Jay, going back to your slide 24 where you're talking about the incredibly fine detail, I was going to ask you what she was working in. You mentioned later on mostly gouache with some pencil over the top.
Ink was a medium of choice.
But in your slide 24, all that tiny detail of the embroidery and the little decorations, the ruby gems you mentioned?
That's gouache.
That's gouache.
Or I believe it's gouache. She worked primarily in gouache.
As a non-artist, am I right in thinking that gouache is a thick medium that you can build up the layers rather than you've got to be really careful not to smudge something lighter? Or is it something where you've got to be incredibly careful if you want something to be nice and light in the middle of a dark colour?
I work primarily in gouache, and gouache is a coverall. It's the best way to describe it. It has the consistency of egg tempera, but it dries to a much firmer, like base layer.
So in other words, if you wanted to have a little light white highlight like she has on one of those pieces, it's where you've got to leave off and go around it.
No, it's like a gouache is like a multi. It covers as soon as you paint it, it covers.
So she's got to be incredibly
there are
careful.
mixtures, there's opaques and then there's translucent. So
she's got to be incredibly careful working with an incredibly fine brush for that level of detail. This is what I'm asking.
I'm interested in brushes. Because I'm a painter and I don't know if I can see them again. But anyway, the brushes I would like to see because they must have been. In art you have like the grades, you have like about 1 to 15 on brush size, but then you also go down to 0, so there's a 0 which is the really tiny brush, that's probably the smallest ever you've ever seen, but then they go to 000 and treble 0, and treble 0 is probably about 5 hairs, so it would be interesting to see her brush collection to see how small they got.
Two stories about Pauline to express her generosity. One was that she did return to Narnia many times. She did 4 paintings for Sibley's Land of Narnia. She did that calendar, which I've seen in the dealer's room, well worth buying. And she also did a deluxe Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe. And she said that, a little slight comment from her, when she went to the premiere of the film of Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe, she felt that they'd used some of her paintings as visuals, particularly the battle in the ravine and the throne room. She felt she could and enjoyed seeing references to her own paintings. Now, this is a true story, now it's happened to me. In about 1979, I first met her because Church House Bookshop did an event for Narnia. And she was there, and I went to introduce myself because I was secretary of the Tolkien Society. Now, about that time, I saw in Boots Chemists, in the gift section, 4 table mats of the 4 seasons in medieval. You know those.
They're in the
You've seen them, yeah. 4 table mats. And I thought, well, that's obviously Pauline Baynes. So I wrote to her, asked her if she'd given permission and got the fee. Well, she might have sold the rights outright for all I know, but anyway, she said she hadn't. So I wrote to Boots and put them in touch, and they paid her. And she sent me, not a table mat, she sent me a jigsaw, a spare jigsaw she'd got, which she'd illustrated. So I thought, well, that's nice.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. So I sent Pauline Baynes a fan letter when my book came out, Tolkien the Great War, and she wrote back with a fan letter, which is one of my real treasures, because she read the book and she said that this is a fabulous portrait of the man I knew. I visited her. One of the things that I wanted to convey to her was that the thing that had made me into a reader and therefore into a writer was in fact the Narnia books originally, and 50% of the Narnia books for me was her illustrations.
Yeah.
And then I read The Lord of the Rings, and the cover was hers.
Yeah.
So she offered the gateway, I mean, literally a portal into Middle-earth as well.
No, I would agree. I probably discovered that I was never a good reader at school. In fact, I was fairly poor. But I was slightly dyslexic, but at the time dyslexia didn't exist. We were just shit at reading. So, and so art became more and more important to me. Primarily introduction to comics, the Dandy and the Beano, and then so if the book was illustrated, it added more for me, and it got me into it.
And I just add to that, one book I don't think you mentioned was her Dictionary of Mythology, which was, I think, a follow-up to the Chivalry one. That's also incredibly beautiful, rich with illustrations on every page, so you can get hold of a copy of that, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
When I met her, she was, I think, really tragically having to churn out, as she put it, illustrations for faith books. She wasn't a woman of faith.
Yeah.
So she was doing this because it was the only market that would pay her at that time, which just seemed bizarre and shocking.
She fell out of fashion.
Yeah, yeah.
I would imagine 80s. In the 80s she fell out of fashion a little bit.
But to get rid of her, to let off some steam, she was meanwhile painting this picture that showed imams and rabbis and priests and so forth in hell firing thunderbolts at each other.
Can I just add to what John's saying? Hi, John. First, I'm probably loud enough actually, but the Book of Mythology, what is so fascinating about that particular book is that there are perhaps 5-6 illustrations down each margin, and she managed to tie in, because the book is alphabetical, so the entries in the book might be, it might be a Russian god, it might be an Indian god, it could be a fairy tale character, a mythological being from Greek or Roman mythology, and the illustrations run down each column, either side of the page, and each of them are woven together, so different mythologies and faiths are all wedded together. I mean, it is a masterly work. In many ways, I think it's actually superior to the Chivalry book.
But of course, sadly, the printers cut the edge off the artwork.
They did. It was absolutely appallingly cropped, so that in fact you lose the margins. I just want to come back to what she worked in, and you may not know this, Jay, but towards the end, and you're right, she did fall out of fashion, and I have the proof of it, because towards the end of her life, she was really, nobody wanted to use her. And I had a story that I'd written about a little owl, a children's story called Osric the Owl, and I asked her whether she might like to illustrate it. And her first response was immediate, and it was very, very typical of Pauline. I can't draw owls, she said. And I just thought back to The Silver Chair and numerous books in which he'd drawn owls many, many times. And I said, yes, of course you can draw it. No, I can't, no. So we were going down to see her, and we stopped off at a kind of bird sanctuary on the way, and I bought her a book of owl pictures and said, I know you can't draw owls, but just in case you ever felt you wanted to try, here's a book of owl photographs. And she said, well, I'll read it. And then typically of Pauline,
Next time we went down to see her, there was a folder there, and hidden books piled on top of it. And she said, "I've done a few little rough drawings for you, but they're no good. So I knew you can't look at them. You mustn't look at them." And I said, "Oh, for goodness sake, no." So I sat there on the edge of the seat while we were chatting, and then she said, "Well, I'll go make some coffee." So she went into the kitchen. The moment she was out of the room, I rushed across, opened the folder, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, these are fantastic." And the interesting thing is she had decided to work in pastel, which was a departure for her. Coloured pencils and pastels, yeah.
In the Arabian Nights, I've just been in the art room, I've got the original from the Arabian Nights, and there's pencil in the top disguised.
Right, yeah. So colour pencils. Yeah. So she produced a whole bookload of these pictures, and the Williams Town Library owns the copyright in the illustrations with all her work. But we've never managed to find a publisher for it. So I must show them to you sometime, because there's an entire publisher.
I'll design it, I'll publish it.
Okay, all right, you've got a deal. So, but the other thing I think that I'm sure the three of us would all testify to, is that she was very mercurial. And she was both, I love the fact that she was both quite proud about her work, and at the same time totally self-effacing. And it was, and when the Book of Narnia, which Jessica, the Land of Narnia, which I wrote, which Jessica mentioned, she was supposed to deliver the pictures to Collins at the time, and she didn't. I had a big parcel arrive at my front door with all those 4 extra paintings she did and some line drawings. And the note inside said, "I don't think these are very good. Would you have a look at them before I send them to the publisher?" And of course I didn't take notice of that. I just took them straight up to the publisher, and then wrote back and said they're at the publishers. But that was her. She was really so insecure in so many ways. And yet you talked about the Tolkien, the Lewis thing that she couldn't draw a lion. She kept that as a kind of niggling thing right through to the end of her life. So she was both, she was both proud of what she did, but at the same time she had this incredible kind of self-effacing modesty. So I loved that ambiguity about her. She was a tricksy lady, actually.
Of interest to the Tolkien Society members here, of course, is that the older generation remember that for many years she was the illustrator for the cover of Malorne. I was editor of Malorne between 1986 and 1990.
Describe the picture.
And it's one of a very white tree. It's an A4, and with sort of widespread branches with tiers and ladders and L's going up and down. And over the years, we were dealing with photocopies of the artwork, which became of a poor and poorer quality. So I went back to the original and cleaned it up.
We couldn't go back to the original.
No, but I went to an earlier edition, an earlier edition, and I had it scanned in those days and reinstated. For the 40th anniversary of former Giles of Ham, we had a big event at the town hall, and we arranged for a sweatshirt. I communicated with her because I met her in '76 at the National Book League exhibition, and I commissioned a design from her. She sent me a design, and I sent it back because, well, I didn't send it back, but I suggested a dragon and the Chrysophylax specifically, and the dragon she drew didn't look like Chrysophylax, looked like a dragon, a nice dragon, quite fierce and so on, but Chrysophylax is not just fierce, he's also funny and enjoyable. So she sent me very kindly another design, which we use as a sweatshirt, and we use the original dragon that she did for the 1992 conference. And she didn't ask a penny, it was a gift to the Tolkien Society. She was a non-remember, so that's elements of our association with the Tolkien Society, which I thought was important to mention.
We've got one more comment to close out, and then unfortunately we'll have to end this lovely session.
Just one last thing. I mean, this was the year she died in 2008, and obviously then this was before the Oxenmoot of that year held in Christchurch. And just an interesting retrospect that there was one fellow member, Maggie Burns, who sadly died a while afterwards, and she had two of Pauline's illustrations, the one of course of Middle-earth and the one of, Narnia, and she was, kind of wondering should she bring them, to show off, and I said, persuaded her, look Maggie, do, I mean people will enjoy them, and they did, so she took them out, she kept them very carefully unrolled and paraded around. So that was, a nice look at what she was doing. Yep, that's exactly, yeah, you're there. Yep, that you are.
We celebrated her life and work, as we do.
Done? Right.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank Jay for just presenting this and how much, it really touched me of how much Pauline Baynes has touched Jay. And if you have not seen his work, please go over there. It's just...
And buy one of my pins.
It's exceptional. It's exceptional.